Magbabago Duterte.
I, Rodrigo Roa Duterte,
Your concern is human rights. Mine is human life. Shoot them dead.
order bago ni Mayor. Di lang daw mo patyon. Kusilon mo bisong. Wala na bisong, wala na may silbi.
Mahirap kayo. Magtiis kayo sa hirap at gutom. Wala akong pakialam.
Parang alipin po tayo ng China. Parang wala tayong karapatan sa sarili natin. Sa upan.
I just simply love Xi Jinping. He understood, he understands my problem, and is willing to help. And I'd like to say thank you, China. Ikaw, ABS-CBN, I will see to it that you're out.
There's nothing really to be extra scared of that coronavirus thing.
We were excellent. Na-control po natin ang pagkalat ng sakit.
The Philippines' total COVID-19 caseload reaches 1 million Monday, as the Health Department logs 8,929 new confirmed infections.
Maliit na bagay ito sa buhay natin. Marami tayong dinaanan mas grabe, mas mahirap, mas na magluluha ngayon. Gusto ko nang umiyak sa harap ninyo.
Hindi lahat may ayuda, hindi lahat nakakakuha ng sapat na ayuda. Gutom yung mga Pilipino and kailangan natin magkaroon ng action.
Wala lang isip yung mga gagawin yan. What they just do is just to show to the people that they care, but they do not really care because of their ignorance.
Dapat hindi masamain ng gobyerno dahil tumutulong na nga sila eh. Tapos binibigyan pa nila ng ibang kahulugan.
Pagbulag ka na, no? Hindi mo na di-differentiate ang liwanag sa dilim.
Hello, I'm Decopin, and you are watching Rappler. A little under a year from now, we are going to make a decision that will dictate where the Philippines goes. A lot is at stake in the 2022 presidential elections, and on Rappler, our message is clear. We want you, us actually, the voter, to be the hero in this story. Back in 2016, our hashtag for the elections was hashtag the leader I want. This time, you want to highlight you, the voter, in the 2022 elections. Hashtag We Decide, Atin ang Pilipinas, highlights our duty to reclaim our country. We believe and we know that we can reclaim our nation by voting. And what better way to prep for 2022 than by learning, educating, and asking questions? Welcome to PH Vote Dialogues. Okay, so simple lang yung goal natin dito, di ba? We want to bring together and converse. Here we bring together veteran journalists, experts, Rappler's own editorial team, thought leaders from different fields, and you, the viewer, wherever it is that you're watching this from, because you want to understand each other better. Kaya if you have questions, please leave them in the comment section. Someone will be monitoring and we will be able to ask your questions later on in the show. So 2 days ago, President Rodrigo Duterte delivered his last State of the Nation address. It was Duterte's longest SONA. Sa mga nanood, I'm sure you felt it. It was 2 hours and 45 minutes long, more or less. And yet a lot of people were left hanging, especially when it came to questions about how the Philippine government plans to address the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and the economic problems that stem from over a year and a half in lockdown. Kaya habang medyo fresh pa sa memories at emotions natin yung last SONA ni Duterte, let's talk about the presidency. Ano nga ba ang trabaho ng Chief Executive ng Republic of the Philippines? Ano nga ba ang ano ang realities ng pagiging Pangulo? And perhaps to guide us come 2022 sa pagboboto, what characteristics, skills should the next president have given the realities of today, Kasama ko tonight to talk about that is Manila Standard News Editor Joyce Panares. She'll be joining us in a little bit. Habol lang siya, don't you worry. We also have Rappler multimedia reporter Camille Elemia, poet and my kababayan from Butuan, Ato Ini Kajawanta, Alfonso Manalastas, and writer and former presidential speechwriter and podcaster, Ali Sanggalang. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining me tonight on this admittedly medyo nakakatamad na Wednesday evening. Okay, sige. So start tayo. Napagit ko nga, di ba? A few days ago was the SONA. It feels like a lifetime ago, pero Monday lang yun. Wednesday pa lang ngayon. So napanood nyo ba yung SONA? Why or why not? If you did, anong impressions nyo? And did anything stand out from Duterte's last SONA? I'll start with Camille. Kasi si Camille, required manood at mag-cover ng SONA. So let's make the most of the fact that Camille was required to watch the SONA. Camille, what are your impressions?
Honestly, parang una, hindi naman ako nagulat dun sa mga nangyari. Like, in the sense na yung ad-lib niya and all that. Actually, parang kalagitnaan. I was actually asking Pia and other Rappler reporters na, is this the first time, if ever, that President Duterte will not be using ad-libs and all that? Kasi akala ko, di ba, parang for the longest
Umasa
time,
tayo
nagbabasa lang siya ng script. May ganong false hopes tayo Pero hindi So anyway, pero after no, habang tumagal, parang lahat throwback na lang. Parang nothing new really. Ako personally, I was expecting na, kasi we're facing like a lot of uncertainty dahil nga dito sa Delta variant and wala tayong nakuhang parang hope or leadership or vision on how the government will address this serious threat. So yun yung nakaka-disappoint. Like as a voter, as a Filipino, and also as a journalist. Kasi lahat tayo, hindi natin alam anong gagawin. Pero like, we all look up to our leader Kasi wala naman Sila yung usually may access to all available information. So dapat sila yung makakagawa ng parang. Pero admittedly, sinabi niya na hindi niya alam, which is generally, okay, sige, pwede mo sabihin. Pero yung sabihin mo na dasal na lang, parang nakakawala ng hope for the Filipino people na dapang-dapa na nga, wala ka pang mapagkunan.
Walang direction na. Okay. For Ali and Alfonso naman, did you watch the 2-hour and 45-minute SONA? Why or why not? May mga takeaways ba kayo from watching it or from reading about it after? Whoever wants to go first.
Ali, do you want to go first? Or
Ikaw, kahit ano. Go.
Okay, I can go ahead. I didn't finish the whole thing. I watched it in bits and pieces, and I do feel like we're in this like unique position as viewers where we know the importance of language, especially when it comes from the perspective of the president, where rhetoric often translates to official policymaking. But at the same time, we know based on like his historical track record that Duterte likes embellishment. There's a lot of unnecessary gravitas, unnecessary machismo that is being spewed when there's actually important matters that has to be discussed. And so we thank you, the journalists, for synthesizing all of that messy clutter of information and curating it in a way that's palatable and digestible for the viewing public. So that was my experience.
Ali.
Nalilito rin ako kung papanoorin ko or hindi dahil may trabaho. Pero I ended up watching pa rin. Hindi ko natapos, naubusan ako ng lakas. Hindi ko kinaya yung 3 hours na. Pero yun, nanood pa rin ako siguro kasi siguro may natitira pa rin akong konting pag-asa na may maririnig akong tama. No? Or ewan, baka nag-aabang lang din ako na may mangyaring kabulastugan doon. No? So, siguro yung tanong ko, tungkol nga ba talaga siya sa state ng nation natin, yung maririnig natin doon. No, kasi hanapin mo sa SONA yung laman, parang numbers siya tsaka words. Anong sinasabi ng data na ipe-present niya? Anong sinasabi ng mga salita niya? Matutuwa ba tayo sa report? May inspire ba tayo sa mga sasabihin niya? Parang mas nalabuan ata ako kaysa mas naliwanagan after kong makinig. No? And sa akin kasi parang reflection or parang pasilip yung SONA sa kung paano pinapatakbo ng Pangulo yung bansa. No, makikita mo yung kaseryosohan o yung malasakit ng presidente sa paghahanda niya sa SONA. No, kasi ito na yung pagkakataon niyang ilatag at linawin yung lagay ng bansa, no? At kung ginagawa ng ano yung ginagawa ng gobyerno para tugunan yung mga problema. No, so kung malabo at parang labo-labo yung sinasabi, reflection yun na baka malabo at labo-labo rin yung pamamahala. At kung hindi mo sineseryoso yung SONA, baka hindi rin mo talaga sineseryoso yung trabaho. No, so yun, parang mas nalabuan ako kaysa mas naliwanagan.
Kukuha tayo ng more insights from Ali kasi nabanggit ko nga kanina, he was a speechwriter during the administration of the former president, the late President Aquino. So we'll have much more insight, diba, kung ano yung workings. But also, we're joined na now by Joyce. Hello, Miss Joyce. Ikaw, malamang na-require ka rin panoorin ang SONA tulad ni Camille para i-cover. Ano yung impressions nyo? May nag-stand out ba sa inyo from Duterte's last State of the Nation address?
Well, it was quite long. And so parang I was waiting for a climax. But I was waiting for something to happen. Parang ganun. Parang it left me a bit parang bitin, parang nakulangan ng konti. Oo. Yeah,
Kasi
but I had to listen to the entire almost 3 hours SONA.
Right. You know what? Even if I'm in media, because I handle lifestyle entertainment for Rappler now, I have to, again, not just our colleagues in Rappler, but everyone in news media. Like, honestly, it's quite difficult, diba? Like 2 hours and 40, that's a very long speech, and then you have to condense it after, and then you have to make sense of it in the succeeding days of the SONA. But anyway, gusto ko mag-throwback ng konti because we're talking about the presidency. Nabanggit nyo nga, parang you guys watch the SONA even if you weren't required to, or you watch snippets of it, or you took the effort to read about it after. Kasi, I mean, at the end of the day, diba, even if it isn't actual policy, the pronouncements matter. So let's talk about the office of the presidency, or the office of the president. What was your first notion of it? Parang pwedeng fiction, pwedeng from news, from fiction, from an actual Philippine president, or the presidency in general. Like, what was your first memory of a president? Siguro let's start with Joyce or Camille.
Siguro ako yung pinakamatanda. Pero ang
wise.
No, not gentle way of putting it. Pero no, but I think ang pinakauna ko sigurong stark memory of any presidency is really that of former President Joseph Estrada, because I was already in college and nakikirally kami nung time na yon. I remember I was covering for Jorn 102, and then nagtago pa ako sa mommy ko na I didn't tell her that I was gonna cover. And then I saw Nora Honor. So my immediate reaction was, oh my God, storya yun. Kasi ando dun siya. So tumakbo ko sa stage para makipag-gitgitan. And if naisip ko yun, malamang naisip din yun ng ibang reporters. So nung umere yung balita sa Hagabi, ayun, katabing-katabi ko ni Nora Honor. So booking na booking ako sa nanay ko. Iyon ang pinakauna ko siguro talagang may diwa na ako at naintindihan ko na what's happening na memory ng presidency.
Camille.
Ako naman, same din. Pero I think I was still in grade school then. Parang ano siya, 'di ba? Like pinapanood natin siya kasi impeachment 'yon. So parang lahat ng tao kasi required ka rin sa school na parang intindihin kung ano bang nangyari sa kasi ba yun? Basta kailangan mo siyang basahin or panoorin. Tapos, ang pinaka natatandaan ko talaga noon, yung mga reporters, like, I remember that was Jiggy Manikad ba yun? Yung na ano pa sa ulo, sa EDSA.
Ay, correct. Tama.
Yeah, oo, yun. Tapos, Maki
Nakapagmura
Pulido
pa
pa
yata
was
si Jiggy
running.
nun.
Oo.
Oo, tama.
Tapos, nung unang impression ko noon, kasi before the era thing happened, dahil pinag-aaralan sa school, di ba, na parang these people are larger than life, na parang savior ng bayan. Parang lahat sa kanila. Tapos, nung nangyari yung ERAP, na parang, ay, hindi pala ganun. Parang, hindi pala lahat ng pwedeng presidente, ganun ang dating. So, ganun ang talagang mangyayari. So, yun yung first ever na tumatak sa akin until now.
Okay, tatanungin ko muna kay Joyce at kay Camille, di ba? Kasi so yun yung impressions niyo, first memories niyo of the president or of a presidency. Both of you covered the president or presidents in the past, were part of the Malacañang press corps. Paano nagbago yun? Or nagbago ba yung impression niyo or memory niyo of a president or of the presidency then compared to when you were actually part of the press that had to worry about what was happening in Malacañang 24/7?
Siguro sa akin, kasi ang inabutan ko na was Gloria and then Pinoy. Yung kay Gloria nun, parang in a way, it was an eye-opener for me na una tao rin naman yung presidente. Kasi galing ako ang perspective ko was coming from someone na nakirally para bumaba sa ERAP and then nakirally para patalsikin si Gloria. Tapos biglang ando doon, kailangan mag-cover. And then you'd see na, with all their weaknesses and their frailties and their strengths, taong-tao rin sila. Iba doon sa nakikita yung nakikita ninyo sa media, siguro 20% lang yun ng pagkatao nila. Behind the scene, yung 80%, yun yung totoong nangyayari sa Malacañang. The ones that are not reported, and I'm sure Ali would agree, a lot of the things that are not reported are really yung mas importante kaysa paminsan dun sa nare-report, ano? Tao sila, marunong sila magalit. Kaya kanilang deadmahin kung ayaw kanilang kausap. Ako ilang beses, kasi nung time na yon, nung dumating ako, si GMA ayaw na niya magpa-interview. This was post after the Hello Garci controversy. Yes. So this was the time na ayaw niya magpa-interview. And a lot of the members of the press corps parang pagod na rin. Pagod na rin na subukan siyang interviewin. Pero parang ako naman, parang hindi tayo pwedeng sumuko. Kung ayaw niyang sumagot, ilagay natin sa storya natin, ayaw niyang sumagot. But we should not stop trying. So I kept on trying. Minsan, alam mo yon, yung storya mo, ang sinagot lang niya, yes. Mabubuo mo na yung storya mo, 8 paragraphs long, parang ganon. Or minsan, pinandilatan ka lang yan ng mata. Tapos parang, ano bang gagawin ko dito sa storya ko? Pero ganon ko siya nakita. Tapos mas lalo siguro kay Pinoy kasi mas parang mas open siyang makipag-usap sa media. Baka I'm getting too way ahead of the discussion.
No,
pero yun lang yung nakita ko. And even GMA had her very human moments with the press corps na hindi nare-report. I remember she would talk about little things like paano nanalo siya sa isang cooking contest dati. Alam mo yun, yung mga hindi naman nare-report or paanong minsan nakiki-unwind din siya sa amin. Lalo na kapag provincial trips. And madalas yung biyahe nung time niya dahil kung ano-anong ino-open niya. Minsan, alas 5, gising na kami. Or alas 5, nasa BPO na kami kasi nag-open siya ng BPO. So, yung mga ganong bagay.
Ang hirap, no, kung yung presidente or yung kina-cover mo, morning person, kasi kailangan mo rin maging morning person as a reporter. Camille, ikaw naman, ano yung
mahirap.
sorry. Camille naman, ano yung experience mo rin? Like, or how did your experience of covering the president differ from your initial concept of how the presidency works or how a president works?
Super agree ako sinabi ni Joyce na talagang yung human side nila. Kasi kunwari, for the longest time before covering Malacañang sa Senate ako. So iba yung dynamic sa Senate, iba yung parang tingin, because of that dynamic, iba rin yung tingin mo sa Malacañang kasi from the Senate's point of view. Tapos pagdating mo sa Malacañang, una, parang, ganito pala yung presidente. Like, this is how you cover the president, like the office, and then how you cover the president as a human being. So dalawa yon. And also nagulat ako sa intensity ng protocol kasi coming from from Congress, iba naman yung, 'di ba? Parang pwede kang dumiretso sa source mismo doon hindi talaga. Tapos nagulat din ako na parang ang tagal-tagal ko nag-cover ng Senate, sobrang ngarag everyday. Pagdating sa Malacañang, parang ito na pala 'yon. Na parang ma-realize mo na yung difficulty na access to information, parang ang nangyari sa Malacañang kasi lahat official So, ibibigay sa'yo. So, ang challenge nun was to find other sources of information aside from the official ones. Kasi like, as what Joyce mentioned, talagang mas mahalagang yung malaking story, yung nangyayari behind the scenes or yung hindi talaga sinasabi ng mga spokespeople.
Natatawa si Ali dun sa banggit.
Yung adjustment.
Ng formality of Malacañang. Sige, let's go to Ali also kasi yun nga, what was your first impressions or first concept or notion of a presidency? And then when you actually joined the speechwriters group under the former president, the late President Aquino, how different was it? Like, ano ba siya? Meme ba to na expectations reality? Or was it actually close to how you envisioned a president or a presidency?
Parang malayo kasi yung talon From what I remembered, parang ERAP din Grade 7 ako nung EDSA 2. Tapos, di ba yun yung text blast pa yung nagkalat nun Wala pang social media para pumunta sa EDSA. Yun yung EDSA 2, no? So siguro naalala ko talaga yung power line ni ERAP nun yung "Wag mo akong subukan." May sabi niya. So parang, ewan ko, layo lang talaga nung nakikita ko noon sa presidency. Tapos, after naman kasi noon, wala naman akong parang nasusubaybayan ko naman yung government, balita, ganyan. Pero ang layo bigla ng talon nung pumasok na ako sa Malacañang. Kumbaga wala talaga akong planong yun yung maging career path ko. So nung pumasok ako doon, siguro yung una ko naisip ay anong ginagawa ko dito? Kasi at saka appropriate ba tong suot ko para dito? Kasi si Miss Joyce dumatawa kasi totoo lang, nung kami speechwriters noon, 3 lang muna kami. Tapos wala talaga kaming damit na appropriate for the private office. So, yung isa kong kasamang writer, na galing pa siyang BPO noon, I think. Wala siyang barong. Tapos siguro medyo lousy yung suot niya. Hinarang talaga siya ng PSG, tapos tinanong ko anong ginagawa niya dito. Tapos, kung hindi niya pa pinakita yung, kung hindi pa siya siguro sinabihan ni Secretary Carandang na "Oy, speechwriter yan. Hindi pa kami mapapapasok." So, nung nandun na, hindi ko na rin napansin parang nakaka-pressure talaga nung una kasi Pangulo ng Pilipinas Pero habang tumatagal, siguro dun mas nagiging tao na yung Pangulo. Pero isa sa mga iniisip ko talaga nun, Bea, dahil sunod-sunod yung president na parang nagkaroon ng issue sa corruption, parang ano kaya mangyayari pag pumasok ako doon? Makaka-witness kaya ako nun? Makakaranas kaya ako ng ganun? Makikita ko ba yun sa presidente o sa mga boss ko? Anong magiging reaction ko kapag nakita ko yun? At siguro na medyo na-empower ako na yung mga kasama kong sa government ay mga bata rin, young idealistic din na mga nakatulad ko na parang feeling ko kapag kami nakita kaming ganun, siguradong may magsasalita about it. And ayun, natuwa naman ako na natapos namin yung taon na walang naging ganong pakiramdam.
Buong 6 years ka, no? And like with the speechwriters group, tama ba?
Yes.
Long time yun to adjust your wardrobe para appropriate siya para sa Malacañang. Okay, Alfonso, alam ko hindi ka Gen Z, i-deny mo na Gen Z ka, no? Hindi, pero what was your first impressions of the Philippine president or the Philippine presidency, and how did that change as you grew older?
I suppose, well, I was born in 92, so by then the president was Ramos. He was elected, I think, that year. And basically, coming from the perspective siguro of bata, wala naman, every information I get about the sitting president, it goes through this filtration system of like what my parents think, what the adults around me think before I can form my own opinions, or if you can even consider them my own opinions to begin with. And so there was really not a lot of distinction. And I mean, I remember my experience as a child was that it wasn't particularly different between the presidents up until I suppose towards the end of Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, and then towards of course Pinoy and then Duterte, where I felt the more acute distinctions between how they administered their leadership. And so as a child, I feel like we also have to sort of zoom in on our education system, and this may be, this may be a stretch, but I remember with Hekasi as well, in classes, you know how you had postcards of presidents and heroes, of them being illustrated in very similar ways, in fact, and how they would usually sit next to each other. And so, coming from the perspective of a child, I feel like we need to establish better distinctions between what makes a national hero and what makes a president. Because from a child, especially since all of these people were those who existed, a century ago, it's a little hard to be able to really classify when one's a morally corrupt, important figure in history, or when one is an important figure in history who happens to also be morally good. And so, as a child, all of them to me were just myths. I mean, in a way, I feel like it helped to fuel the myth making that we tend to attribute a lot of the decision making that the voters make. And so, if it weren't, for example, if it weren't for films like Henry Luna, not a lot of people would figure out that, Aguinaldo wasn't a particularly good person, right? He was just a very old person who also existed in the time when national heroes existed. So these distinctions, I feel, have to be made. But I feel like the more conscious appreciation and observation of the presidency came towards 2010 onwards, when before Pinoy, during the 2010 elections, and then of course the 2016 elections. And it is during those times when I thought the distinctions were more particularly pronounced. And I feel like, kasi nabanggit kanina, di ba, for example, ni na Miss Joyce, that there's a lot of humanity that's left undocumented when it comes to covering these presidents. And I feel like from the perspective as well of somebody who doesn't operate within that particular environment, we have the tendency to humanize them in our heads as well. That when they make certain legislative mistakes, for example, that affect the grassroots so terribly, in our heads, it's just, but they're humans. And I feel like it's important to bridge the kind of humanity that's being witnessed by journalists and the kind of humanity that's being interpreted by viewers in their heads, because I feel like there's that whatever danger can arise from certain assumptions emerge from that gap. So I feel like it's important to be able to establish those distinctions and also bridge those gaps.
Alam mo, totoo yun. Kasi parang na-realize ko lang din, parang sa college ko lang ata na-unlearn yung pag-mythologize ng mga leaders natin. And then, syempre, gumuho siya lalo nung naging reporter na ako kasi, oh my God, ano to, ang gulo. Ang gulo pala. Kasi tao nga sila, ang gulo nila, ang daming dysfunctions. But anyway, kasi kanina pa ako banggit no, the president, the presidency. So balik muna tayo sa basic definitions or of the president kasi the Constitution says the executive power shall be vested within the President of the Philippines. Ang simple lang. Pero what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to have executive power when you are the president? Siguro let's start with Joyce and Camille. Like, in the context of being part of the Malacañang Press Corps, kung hindi kayo familiar, siguro naman familiar yung viewers natin tsaka yung mga kasama natin sa webinar, di ba? May mga beat kasi yung mga reporter. Yung MPC, sila yung nakadikit talaga sa Malacañang, sa Office of the President, sa President. Pero ano ang pinoproblema nyo? Anong pinoproblema ng isang MPC reporter? Like, what offices do you need to watch over? What offices consume your thoughts on a day-to-day basis? Joyce?
Alam mo, if I will liken the coverage ng Malacañang, para siyang chop suey. Sa totoo lang. No, in the sense, that I'm sure Camille will agree with me, wala talaga kaming specialization. Unlike, for example, you cover Senate, then you get to be aware of how the legislative processes work. Or you cover House, the same thing. You cover Defense, you have a specialization. Sa Malacañang, wala. Yun ang literal na para kang kangkong. Pag tinapon ka doon, kailangan mong tumubo kahit walang tubig. Kasi kahit ano, pwede mong saklawan. Diba, on bad days, we sometimes write 8 stories a day. And that's for print, which means long, medyo mas mahaba kaysa kung breaking news lang, diba? I-distill mo na yung stories mo lahat eh. And it can range from economy to the military to umubo yung presidente, to the love life, to kamusta ang sex life ng presidente mo, di ba? What one time GMA said, she had plenty. So, lahat ng pwedeng saklawan, anything under the sun that can happen inside Malacañang, outside Malacañang, na within the ambits of the power of the president, pasok siya. But if you'd ask strictly kung ano talaga yung mga minomonitor na agencies, then of course you'd have the Office of the President, the Office of the Spokesperson, the Chief Legal Presidential Counsel, the Legislative Liaison Office. Tingin ko papasok din kahit paano yung NSC. OPAP, although meron talagang nakahiwalay ang OPAP nasa Pasig. But, so yun, yung mga yun. Tapos pag minalas-malas ka pa, cabinet meeting, sa lahat ng cabinet ando doon, di ba? Kasi hodang, para kang geisha, parang geisha theory eh. Kaya ayaw mo o gusto mo, pag andyan sa harapan mo, kailangan mo i-cover. So, I mean, it goes on and on and on. Tapos parang, oh my God, hindi mo matapos tong cabinet meeting ninyo. So lahat, from Bagyo. I mean, we've had cabinet meetings before with GMA ng 2 in the morning. She suddenly decides, I need a cabinet meeting now because binabagyo itong lugar na to and bakit wala tayong ginagawa. At one time, I remember, she was calling this mayor, the area of that mayor was being deluged by this really huge storm. And the mayor na alimpungatan. So he says, sino ba to? And then she says, this is Gloria Arroyo. Alam mo yun, pero okay, sige. So lahat. Yun ang long answer ko dun sa question mo, Bea. Sorry.
Parang yun ang humanity ng Pangulo na ayaw mong i-witness na kung mayor ka. Anyway, gusto ko lang i-add na favorite ko pala kasi nag-cover ako dati ng DLG. Favorite ko kung yung DLG secretary pupunta ng Malacañang kasi pwede ko nang i-text yung Malacañang reporter na. Wala, papunta na dyan yung beat ko. Sorry, problema mo na yan. So yun yung favorite ko yung dati ng reporter ako. Camille, kamusta yung experience of being an MPC?
Nung TV reporter ako, lalong kawawa yung Malacañang reporter noon. Senate reporter ako noon, so syempre ang daming nangyayari. Pero pag Malacañang reporter ka, parang wala kang sariling VO story, wala kang own package kasi yung story mo ipapasa sa reaction ng president to a certain legislation, ipapasa dun sa Senate reporter na gumagawa ng story on legislation. So parang ikaw talaga yung parang yun yung work mo. Medyo ganun yung effect niya na anything talaga. Lahat dadaan kahit concern ng barangay. Minsan, saan ba ito saan ba ito papasok? Sige, forward na lang sa desk. As in lahat, ganung level. Pero I think kasama dun sa ako, nung nagko-cover nung Malacañang, kasama dun pati yung attached agencies. pati yung tao noon, parang siguro kasi sa Rappler, onti lang tayo eh. So wala tayong choice na parang, sige, lahat ng may president or may attached to the president sa'yo na as Malacañang reporter, ganyan. Pati cabinet, kunwari, ikaw, DILG ka. Swerte ko, sa'yo na yun. Pero lahat,
Ay,
all
hindi
others,
parate
dapat may
pinapasa ko sa'yo dati. Joke lang. Sige, so,
yun
continue.
nga eh. So ayun, lahat dapat may contact ka kasi sometimes din, syempre hindi mo expect na magsasalita yung president, hindi rin magsasalita yung spokespeople. So gagawa ka talaga ng paraan na makakuha at makabigay sa editor mo ng information kasi hindi excuse na ay hindi nagsalita yung presidente kasi hindi naman talaga magsasalita yun.
Okay. Ali, behind the scenes na to, di ba? Nabanggit nga nila, di ba, na kumbaga octopus pala ang MPC. Kung saan mo, alam mo yung nightmare, kung ako MPC, yung nightmare ko siguro kung taxation, yung pag-uusapan. Kasi alam mo
Nung
yun,
MPC reporter ako, pag naliligo ako, ang phone ko ay kasama ko sa banyo. Sa sobrang takot ko na may mamiss ako na tumawag na source. Ganun siya. Saka maraming skill set. Sorry, Alia. Singit ko lang, Alfonso. Maraming skill set na kailangan ka matutunan. Kung na kailangan mo matutong sumakay ng... Sorry, nakamute ba? No, I was just saying na marami kang skill set na dapat matutunan. Hindi lang sa pagsusulat. Kailangan mo matutong sumakay ng military plane. Kailangan mong matuto ng maraming bagay. Tumakbo ng mabilis. Walang kain, dire-diretso yung coverage. Hindi ka pwedeng hindi kumain eh. So, kailangan matuto kang kumain habang nasa sasakyan, magbato ng storya habang bumabiyahe. So, yung lahat ng yun, kailangan kabisado mo. It came to a point na ay sobrang galing kong matulog sa C-130. Ang sama nga lang ng record ko kasi at one point parang pabalik kami from Mindanao to Manila. So pagod na pagod ako kasi tapos na yung coverage, 'di ba? Eh medyo maluwag, hindi namin dala yung number 1 vehicle. Saka yung dogs, wala yung K9. So maluwag. So nakatulog ako as in nakahilata ako sa C-130. Tapos pagising ko, nakababa na kami. Sabi nung sundalong ka back to back ko, sabi niya, alam mo ma'am, maingay na yung motor ng C-130, mas maingay yung hilik mo. So parang, okay. Bala ka sa buhay mo, basta ako kailangan ko mag-survive at makapagbato ng storya ko.
ang ganda ng skill nun, pang resume yun. Joy, sa totoo lang, yung kaya mong humilik sa C1, diba medyo intense yung ingay na na. So medyo ibang klaseng life skill yung kaya mong makatulog sa isang C-130. Anyways, so si Ali, yung nga, behind the scenes naman, di ba? Parang anong ibig sabihin when the executive power is with the president? Like, because you've been witness to that. Kasi siguro some of our viewers and some of our the people here in this webinar have seen na rin yung mga anecdotes from people who used to work during the Aquino administration of what it was like behind the scenes. But what was it like from your own experience, like managing all these attached agencies, the cabinet meetings, the cabinet members, diba?
Madugo talaga eh. Kasi ang daming nagbabangga ang mga opinion, interests na kailangang upuan niya at kailangan niyang mag-decide. Pero siguro, paano ba? Siguro hindi ka, yung trabaho ng speechwriter siguro kasi mas nasa speaking engagements kami. Yung mga cabinet meetings parang as much as possible parang iba yung pinapasama nila para sila yung magko-consolidate ng mga makukuha doon. Tas sa amin na lang ibabato. No, pero mas nakaka-relate siguro ako doon sa sinasabi ni Miss Joyce na ma-action yung yung trabaho ng presidente. Hindi lang yung mga meetings na yun, yung mga in-betweens noon, yung kailangan niyang pumunta sa iba't ibang probinsya, pag may mga provincial and foreign trips, talagang takbo dito, takbo doon. So, ay iniisip ko nga parang kung kami na mga mas bata, kailangan ng ganung level of energy, paano yung presidente? No? Na kapag kami nagpapahinga na, siya nandun pa. 'Di ba? Tuloy-tuloy pa rin. So, kailangan talaga nung energy And siguro at least yung sa akin niya, kung feel ko na pagod ako, what more nga yung sa kanya. And yun, siguro kung reflection din naman kung multiple yung functions na kailangan gawin ng mga staff ng presidente, ganoon din siya, 'di ba? So siguro ako yung iba sa perspective ko lang as a writer. Akala ko yung pinasok ko nga ay magsusulat ako. So nasa isang corner kami at magsusulat kami. Pero halo-halong skill set. Speechwriter ka minsan para kang PSG na humaharang sa mga tao.
Sa media.
Kailangan mong maging media, magre-record ka ng kasama, katabi ko yan si na Miss Joyce minsan kapag may ambush interview, lalapit ka sa speaker, ikaw ang magre-record. Lately ko lang na-realize na pati pala pagiging photographer, pinasok na namin. Kasi kami rin yung kumukuha ng photos ng presidente at binabato namin sa official gazette para magamit. No, kasi kailangan talaga mabilis lahat eh. And parang yung trabaho namin talaga kailangan as early as possible na mailabas siya, maibigay sa media or mailagay sa official gazette. Magawa lahat. Ayun. Parang ganun yung ano ko. Yung
Actually, I wanted to ask that para maintindihan din ng mga tao, di ba? Na, like when we talk about the president and even the presidency and even the president, ang daming moving parts nun. Maybe people, like when people envision the president, the departments, right, the cabinets, pero ang dami pa mga little things, offices, sanga-sanga pa, na gumagalaw at the same time on any given day. Na-deserve ko yung pinakamahirap na tanong para kay Alfonso. Hindi, joke lang, Alfonso. Hindi, kasi parang naalala ko lang, di ba, parang paulit-ulit sa police and military, there's a concept called command responsibility. So kahit kasalanan nung nasa baba sa'yo, kung ikaw yung nakatataas or ikaw yung immediate or kahit nga hindi immediate boss, parang responsibility mo pa rin yun. Bukod sa fact na yung president ay commander-in-chief, di ba? So outside the AFP, is that concept applicable ba? Parang given ang daming nangyayari, na siguro naman hindi alam ng any president yung very well, maybe some do know, pero yung mga kahit mga maliliit na detalye sa mga attached agencies or sa mga departments, hindi naman siguro niya alam lahat yun. Pero like do you think that that concept applies na kung if something goes wrong within the
I think it absolutely does. I'm part of a national democratic mass organization. I go to mobs, I go to rallies, and when we hold into account facets of the government, particularly say the AFP or the PNP, when they perpetuate unnecessary violence, especially against the national minorities, the farmers, the peasants, unionists in particular, we always hold Duterte into account, not just AFP and PNP per se. And that's precisely because we come from a culture, a political culture in which it is the president that materially enables these institutions to be able to execute whatever evils they want to execute, and at the same time, given the pronouncements, it's not just a matter of official policy and the kind of funding that's being funneled into these institutions, but it's also a matter of the kind of language that the president uses in imploring these institutions and committing those particular crimes. And so I do come from that particular tradition of protest, and I do come from that particular mindset that when we hold those institutions accountable, or when we hold individual transgressions accountable, it's not isolated from the larger forces at hand. Like for example, when we criticize, for example, the national police, and we say even the whole slogan of all cops are bastards, even though we don't statistically mean that all cops are bastards. That it's a criticism of the kind of culture of impunity that was cultivated in these particular institutions, that's being further emboldened by the language, by the support, by the material funding and official policies of the president. And so there is a definite direct link to those things. Even when they're, and we also have to create certain distinctions nga, diba, between when something is deliberate and intentional and when something is merely negligent. And I feel like the command responsibility certainly applies for both. And it's funny because a lot of the supporters of the president, for example, tend to privatize accountability when it concerns, say, Nuezca, for example, who shot the slain Gregorios, and how they try to model it as though it's some isolated case, it's some incident that doesn't involve the larger PNP, and by extension doesn't involve the president at all, without considering that the fact that he was able to carry a gun off duty is something that was made materially possible by his by whatever culture of impunity that is actually being criticized, and not just the individual private action of that one person, right? And so I feel like supporters will oversimplify when it's convenient and complicate when it's also convenient. But the simple truth of the matter is that things are complicated, and all of these material entanglements do exist in relation to the president and his powers, and by extension, the culture of injustice, the culture of impunity, all of these things that plague these oppressive institutions in the government.
So yung discussion ng culture, tsaka yung ano, di ba, kumbaga the values or the environment that basically the president sets. Pero bago tayo mag-jump onto that, kasi si Camille kailangan natang umalis in a little bit. Like, what do you, like quickly lang, parang ano yung take nyo rin dun, di ba, na yung command responsibility, yung concept na siya pa rin ang mananagot kung ano mang mangyaring kapalpakan, or kapalpakan and even successes siguro din ng mga nasa ibaba ng Pangulo.
I think, yeah, generally, I believe na command responsibility applies also to the presidency. Kasi parang like, tayo as a culture, di ba, parang we always look up to the chieftain, or we always look up to, kahit noon pa, laging ganon. And with the resources at hand ng presidente, tsaka although meron tayong sinasabi na separation of powers, legislative, judiciary, and executive, pero we all know how it works. Hindi naman yun totoong there's really a separation. Meron pa ring influence yun. So parang for me, in that sense, ano talaga siya at the end of the day, the buck stops with the president.
Joyce?
Yes, I think for certain decisions, yes. Of course, the very minute ones, the ones very down the line, mahirap naman sabihin na it really goes up, all the way up to him or her, kung sino yung nakaupo. Pero siguro ang gusto ko lang sabihin, kakaiba rin yung dynamic sa loob. Kung sa atin, ang tinitingnan natin ay command responsibility, ideally, it doesn't happen all the time, sa loob, dapat siya ang pinakahuling dapat mag-take ng hit. Alam mo yon? The cabinet people are there, so you take the hit for the president. Dapat ganon. Dapat ganon. Ang ideal situation. Na bago pa yan umabot sa kanya, dapat sinalo na yan ng mga nasa paligid niya. It doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes yung mga nasa paligid niya, yung pa yung dahilan kung bakit nagkakaroon ng problema yung nasa taas. 'Di ba? So, pero ganun siya. Ideally, dapat ganun. Na hindi dapat umabot sa level niya. Kasi kung maayos yung piniling cabinet, dapat sa level pa lang na doon, nasolusyonan na kung ano man yung problemang yon bago pa maiakyat, 'di ba? Kaya nga ang daming layers sa dadaanan bago umabot sa kanya eh. 'Di ba? You have the cabinet secretary, you have the executive secretary, you have the cabinet people per se. So lahat 'yon dapat ang papel nila sa buhay ay bago umabot sa presidente, sila muna.
Dapat na-solve mo na yung problema bago dumating.
Oo.
Actually, just to add to that, no, parang naalala ko yung kwento lagi ni Sec Rene, na parang siya yung filter para makatrabaho pa rin talaga. Syempre, as president, di ba, hindi mo naman po problemahin every little thing. Pero, lagi niya sinasabi, siya ang bearer of bad news. So, pag nakikita na siya ni Pinoy, parang sasabihin, ano namang dala mong balita. Laging kasi, pag dumating na kay Sec Rene, dapat nang mag-elevate kay Pinoy. So, parang may ganong level para rin makatrabaho yung presidente. Kasi yun yung opposite naman ang nakikita natin ngayon, na parang every little thing involved yung presidente na hindi na siya talaga maka-govern.
So Ali, yung logical na follow... sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Naalala ko lang, ito hindi ko to inabutan, excuse me. Estudyante pa ako nito. Pero, klaruhin ko lang. Nung time ni Erap, not umaga, because he was still probably asleep, mga lunchtime, he'd issue a statement. Pagdating ng hapon, Jerry Barican would have to clarify. Alam mo yun, yung kailangan niyang ayusin kasi baka ma-misinterpret or as it is, hindi klaro, vague, etc., etc. So doon nagsi-step up dapat talaga yung spokesperson niya, kung sino man yung mga alter egos niya.
Medyo familiar yung kwentong kailangan mag-clarify pagkatapos mag-release ng statement sa panahon ngayon. Ali, siguro yung logical na follow-up doon, no? So, sino ang mga dahilan kung bakit nagkakaproblema si Pina? De joke lang. From your perspective naman, di ba, parang, paano yun? Kasi parang nabanggit na nga ni Camille tsaka ni Joyce, di ba, na parang ideally, kailangan sinasalo muna yan ng mga ibang officials bago pa man dumating sa Pangulo. But what was your experience also, like, you know, in terms of troubleshooting all these things that are happening at the same time?
Halo siya kasing no, parang binibigyan ng tiwala ng presidente yung mga cabinet niya na gawin yung trabaho nila at may kasamang expectation talaga yun. Kaya madiin din talaga siya sa mga niya sa mga cabinet niya may hinihingi siya. Kaya lagi siyang humihingi ng ng klarong report from them. So ayun parang basta yun, parang na-witness ko lang kung gaano parang iba kasi mga kasama niya dyan, ka-close niya na rin no? Pero nakikita ko pagka sa trabaho, hinihingi niya talaga yung resulta kapag sa mga cabinet meeting. Hindi ko na witness yung pagiging niya doon, malambot niya sa cabinet niya. So ayun, kaya siguro paano ba? Medyo
Nawindang ka ba sa tanong ko kanina
nawindang
kung
ako
sino kung sino nagdadala ng problema kay Pinoy dati? Pero siguro yung takeaway, isang main takeaway natin from the discussion is that when you elect a president, you're also, like, you have to make sure na he or she is surrounded by the right people. Kahit sa campaign, makikita mo naman kung yung future cabinet, makikita mo naman kung sa mga tao nakapaligid sa kanya, di ba? Ngayon pa lang actually, sa mga presidential aspirants natin, makikita mo kung sino mga nakapalibot sa kanya, sinong associated sa kanya, malamang sa malamang, doon makukuha yung future cabinet of the next president. So like, if you are voting, and I assume people who are watching this will be voting in 22. Bear that in mind also, na hindi lang Pangulo ang pinipili mo, pero also everyone who will be heading all these agencies, all these attached offices come 2022. Konting pressure lang dun sa Ito yung favorite question ko na prepare ko. No? Kasi nabanggit na rin ni Alfonso slightly kanina, di ba? Yung, di ba, parang how a president dictates the culture or sets the culture or you know, he specified yung culture of impunity. Kasi yung discussion or yung norm siguro is the president is a reflection of the values that are important sa bansa. Pero sa utak ko kasi minsan tingin ko parang yung Pangulo yung nagdi-dictate or yung nagse-set kung ano bang values ang important sa Pilipinas at any given time, right? What school of thought, formal. Ano yung, saan doon kayo mas agree or saan doon yung mas resonate with you? Based on your own experience, you know, in covering Malacañang, working in Malacañang, di ba? And for Alfonso, parang observing all these, you know, injustices by the government in general. Anyone can go.
I think for me, like, we have an inherent culture, pero like yung pag-prioritize kung ano yung mananaig for a certain presidency, doon na nagkakatalo. Like for example, covering, example lang to, sobrang microcosm. Yung sa Malacañang, kakilala mo yung mga, syempre, career officials yung iba dyan. Pero makita mo, nung nag-President Duterte na, nag-iba na. Like, kung ina-adapt na nila kung ano yung treatment ng presidente towards the media. So ganun yon. And also with politicians, for example, nung panahon ni Pinoy, syempre na-cover mo naman sila dati. So panahon ni Pinoy or panahon ni Gloria, ganito sila. Pero dahil maybe, I don't know, fear or dahil popular si President Duterte, nag-iba na rin. So alam mo yon, parang ano yun, pati yung mga Pilipino rin, parang yung mindset na itong mahalaga ngayon, yun na yun. And it came from a popular public figure. Pero ultimately, naniniwala ako underneath everything, we still have that particular Filipino culture na Yun nga lang ang lumalabas ngayon dahil yung tao sa power. Ganun ang pinupush. So I'd go for the
Joyce.
second one.
Sorry. Yes, Joyce.
Sorry. So ako parang tinitingnan ko siya ng I remember yung nung nag-dry run like kahapon. Parang ganoon eh. Parang do we look at it na kultura or baka dahil kasi in truth wala tayong kultura ng totoong politiko or to begin with ng totoong political party. 'Di ba? Parang napaka-individualistic, napaka-personalistic ng pagtingin natin. Kaya ganun din siguro ang shifting alliances at even the culture would shift depende kung sino ang nakaupo. 'Di ba? As opposed to kung meron talaga tayong kultura to begin with, hindi yun dapat magbago. Siguro mas protected lang yung mga career, pero maaari din na kung sino ang nakaupo ay papaling din sila doon sa kung ano ang instructions din nung who's the one in power, 'di ba? So yun, so ako ang mas lamentation ko pa is tingin ko wala talaga tayo or kulang tayo sa tunay na political parties. Ang take off ko lang, sorry, para lang klaro. Ang take off ko lang dito kasi nag-study ako sa Germany. Short courses lang naman. 2 beses. At doon ay nakita ko kung paanong ang political parties doon, for you to be a member, you have to pay. You actually have to invest in the party. And then they're not required to raise funds pag sila'y tatakbo. Kasi depende sa number ng na-elect sa inyo, ay bibigyan din kayo ng subsidy ng gobyerno para kayo ay hindi nakaasa kasi ang nangyayari every 3 years re-raise ka ng funds tapos 3 years after binabayaran mo pa yung mga nagpondo sa pagtakbo mo. So para maiwasan 'yon, 'di ba? So may ganun silang policy. At makita mo na talagang ang basis ng loyalty ay programa. So kung ikaw ay Green Party, kasi ito ang mga polisiya nyo. Kung ikaw ay CDU, Christian Democratic Union, ito kasi ang polisiya ninyo. Dito parang saan ka titingin for that? Siguro may iba, yung mga medyo mas progressive, ano? Even PDP laban for a while, ganoon din. Pero parang andali pa rin kasi ditong bumalimbing, andaling, alam mo yon, hindi pa talaga, hindi tayo bumoboto pa base sa, or kulang pa yung, hindi pa tayo nasa level na pipiliin ko tong party na to dahil sa programa nila. Hindi dahil dun sa personality na itinatakbo nila.
Yeah.
And I think also...
Yes, go ahead, Camille, sorry.
Yeah. No, and I think also kasi syempre parang gusto, di ba, para magkaroon tayo ng political party reform, dapat ipasaya ng Kongreso. Pero sila mismo, nagbe-benefit sila sa ganitong sistema. So how do we expect them to pass something that will go against them and their families? Kaya sila nagpo-flourish ng ganyan-ganyan. So parang yun, parang nasa endless tayo, cycle.
Isa nga yan sa malaking sakit ng ulo kung political reporter ka. Kasi minsan ang hirap mag-keep up kung saan na lumilipat si congressman, si mayor, hindi mo na alam. Iba't iba yung iba't iba yung kulay ng t-shirt niya sa cabinet. Kasi bawat election, ibang t-shirt, ibang kulay na yung bit-bit niya. We'll talk a little bit more about that nga, yung lack of like proper party politics in the Philippines and how that affects the presidency. But let's go muna to Ali or Alfonso, di ba? Yun nga, yung the values, like which is it? Is it both? Or is it none? Like, does the president dictate the values, or do the values select which president we have in power?
I can go first. I somewhat agree with Camille that there are definitely non-negotiables underlying somewhere. I do not know exactly what they are, but I feel like the thing about these non-negotiables, these inherent values, kumbaga, is that we easily overlook them, or we tend to work around them in order to appease our own political preferences. Like for example, we think that human life is absolute, but at the same time, we will elect somebody who will terminate human life ng basta-basta lang, and then justify it as the protection of the human life of those who are threatened by those that were killed. things like that. And I do feel like to some extent, and I don't think that this is just in the Philippines. I think this is, sort of this global social phenomenon in which nakakaroon ng medyo nagtiteeter tayo towards populism, somewhat borderline authoritarian leaderships. And I feel like and parang like the evidence is very clear. I mean, in the Philippines, for example, the liberal center has now become the left, and leftists are now terrorists. I mean, like, it's just this absurd, obscene thing that developed over the course of 6 years, in which the moderates have become the radicals, kumbaga, and then the radicals are now enemies of the state, who are by design and by official policy have to be eliminated. There's even literally, an entire task force for it, and it's this absurd thing that happened over the course of 6 years. So that, I think, is the best example of how leaders and the popularity of leaders have been able to shift the kind of values that are inherent in the country. But also, it didn't just happen overnight. We also have to acknowledge that a lot of groundwork went into it. Like, for example, even in the very language that's being deployed, not just by the president, by allies of the president, to some extent, even sometimes by media, right? When you have the war metaphors, for example, the way we call the drug war a war to begin with, or the anti attempt to quell the communist movement as an anti-terrorism war, things like that. And so there's a lot of dehumanization, which is also a very standard blueprint of the populist playbook of like trying to define a virtuous few and a dangerous others. And in this case, the dangerous others are drug users, drug peddlers, communists, for some reason lumped together as though those things mean the same. And so it's really absurd. And populism has always often worked in the past, and it obviously works now. And I feel like people, especially a lot of the supporters of this administration, I will say this, I'm going to be a little, obviously, partisan and biased against the administration. I do still think that we need to oust the Yawa, even though it's his last term. Sorry, we're live, I'm sorry. But I'm gonna say that a lot of the supporters tend to have this, intellectual high ground in which they tell, for example, yung sa Tarantadong Kalbo, for example, na tumindig, na parang tinatawag nilang bulag, yung the 3%, na parang, really, you're the one who's literally following orders uncritically, and we're the blind ones. Yung parang ganon. It's very unintellectual, very unintelligent how supporters approach these particular issues, and I do not necessarily blame them. I think it's dumb. I think a lot of them are stupid, and well, if may mga kapamilya, if may mga tita-tito akong, at marami silang Duterte supporters, kung merong mga nanonood, I do think you're dumb. But I do not blame you at the same time. It's really just a matter of how effective this government is in terms of their communication, in terms of the kind of language that they deployed, in terms of the narrative that's being crafted out of these little elements that they put together. And obviously, the whole myth-making of Duterte being this small-time effective mayor that's now taking on the big dogs, that I feel like is just a very successful campaign, but also makes it more insidious, makes it more evil in a way.
Yeah, actually, parang gusto ko i-unpack next time yung discussion on how communication, how this administration will be communicating, siguro for a later discussion on PH Vote. Ali, since ikaw, again, parati kong binabanggit na ikaw meron kang, like, nasa front seat ka during the last administration, like, what's your perspective on that? Like, who dictates what, or who imposes the value? Or is the value a reflection? Or is the president a reflection of that values?
Sa akin, parang ang laking influencer talaga ng Pangulo eh. No? Parang siya yung number one influencer, and magti-trickle down siya sa lahat, sa tao. And siguro kami, kami yung unang nakakakita nun, kung ano yung values and principles na nakikita namin lumilitaw sa kanya, yun din yung lead namin eh. At magre-reflect yun sa kanya-kanya naming trabaho. Tapos nakikita ko rin na kapag kung saan man siya pumupunta, no, sa LGUs man or sa ibang bansa, kung ano rin talaga yung tinutulak niyang ano yung mga pinapahalagahan ng administrasyon niya, yun din yung may impluwensya ng mga iba't ibang communities. No? So, sa sinasabi ni Alfonso nga, parang kung kabaliktaran nun yung mangyayari, no? Parang kung questionable yung mga pinanghahawakan ng presidente, ano na lang yung aasahan natin from the people surrounding him, and anong susundan ng tao, no? Anong susundan ng tao? So kailangan may malaki talagang responsibilidad yung pangulo, na kung ganyan yung nakikita natin sa kanya, mahirap umasa rin sa mga tao. So dun sa iikot, I think and mahirap umasa naman na yung magsisimula sa tao. Ano ba, parang ang hirap pero ang laki kasi talaga nung power na meron siya at impluwensya eh. Kaya dapat sa kanya magsimula. Then aasahan mo na babalik yun sa tao, pabalik sa kanya. Yun.
Mag-pause muna tayo ng kaunti kasi si Camille ay kailangan na munang umexit ng very, very quickly. Thank you, Camille, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Magkikita pa naman tayo kasi mag-opisina tayo. But thank you, Camille. Anyway, nabanggit nga ni Ali, 'di ba, yung he is the country's biggest influencer kahit hindi naman na Twitter, in specifically si President Duterte. But again, like parang kanina, 'di ba, when you elect the president, you're not just electing one person. You're picking in effect yung future cabinet ng Pilipinas, you're picking the future leaders of key offices na attached to the office of the president, and you are in a way picking kung anong values mananaig in the country, and especially nga yung mga key offices, key institutions such as the AFP, the PNP, in general, like how government is run. Joyce, gusto kong balikan yung sinabi mo kanina about the party. I want to pick your brain on that kasi thank you for bringing that up yesterday also during our dry run. Na parang, so how does that affect the office of the president or the presidency na yun nga parang walang klarong political system dito sa Pilipinas?
Kasi tingin ko, parang kung magpili siya ng mga cabinet officials niya, halimbawa, hindi rin siya based sa kanyang partido. So, based din yun sa kung sino ang kaibigan niya, sino yung tingin niya ay loyal sa kanya. So, hanggang sa mga ganong klaseng desisyon, ay nagre-reflect yon yung kawalan ng ganong klaseng political parties, ano. Maybe the example I mentioned won't work here. I'm not saying it's what we should copy, but I'm just saying na kulang sa talagang tutok na agenda yung mga existing political parties natin ngayon. Yun ang tingin ko.
Yeah. Kasi parang in a way kasi protection din yung kung may solid ka na political party. Kasi parang nabanggit mo nga kanina, 'di ba? Parang just the mere fact na every election, kumbaga maghahabol ka ng donors, tapos pagkatapos ng election, syempre may mga favors yan, like we can deny it all we want, but
yung mismong sistema natin, it fosters this kind of politics eh.
Yeah.
Na every 3 years kailangan mo mag-ipon. After that, hindi ka pa nakaupo sa office mo, nagbabayad utang ka na. 'Di ba? Aminin man ng politiko o hindi, the moment ma-declare na siya ay panalo, wala pang June 30, start na ng bayad utang 'yan. Appointment sa ganito, kontrata sa ganito. So lahat 'yan kabit-kabit yung problemang 'yan. So hindi naman sila nag-exist in a vacuum. Talagang tahi-tahi yung ganung klaseng problems natin.
Yeah. So yun yung sinasabi nga natin, 'di ba? Parang beyond just, the person that you're voting for president, like observe and take note of the people surrounding that candidate or the presidential aspirant. Kasi ang laking factor talaga niyan once he or she is actually elected president. Now, I want to go beyond Malacañang and the executive and talk about how the president and the presidency, interacts with other institutions. Although nabanggit ito ni Joyce in passing kanina, di ba? Kamusta ano yung dynamics ng Malacañang Press Corps saka ng Pangulo? Considering na di ba parang trabaho din kasi ng MPC, I feel, to sometimes question the president, right? Challenge the president in their story. So, kamusta yung dynamics nun?
Pre-pandemic, mas madali yan. Okay? So ganun ko ipipremise yung sagot ko. Bago nagkaroon ng pandemic, mas madali. Kay Arroyo yan, kay Aquino yan, na yun ang inabutan ko, kaya yun lang ang kaya kong banggitin. Mas madali siya because nakikita mo sila eh. 'Di ba? Kung hindi sumasagot, pwede mo pa rin isigaw yung tanong mo eh. Now, how will you do that in a pandemic? Naka-Zoom ka. Pwede kang hindi tawagin. Pwede kang hindi unmute. So ngayon, the odds are stacked against us. Aminin man natin o hindi. Doble-doble ang trabaho ng media ngayon dahil ganito ang landscape ng coverage natin. 'Di ba dati napakadali. Habang nagpe-press con, pag may sinabing kalokohan yung official, and this has happened in Malacañang several times. Harap-harapan mong pwedeng hindi naman sa pahiyain, no? Pero i-verify at i-fact check ka agad yung sinabi niya. Harap-harapan mo siyang pwedeng sabihin na, sir, sinabi mo to the other day eh. Bakit deny mo ngayon? O bakit wala ba kayong Viber group? Di ba kayo nag-usap? Sabi ni ganito, ganito. Sabi ni ganyan, ito naman. Hindi kayo magkasundo sa mga statements ninyo. Ngayon, paano mo gawin yan? Ito, isang example lang and I will not name the agency out of Chatham rules ba tayo? But anyway, I will not name the agency. This undersecretary made an announcement sa mga reporters. And the undersecretary said that, violators of the curfew and the social distancing will be charged based on Bayanihan 1. And because it was a Zoom event, reporters did not ask anymore, sir, seryoso ka ba dyan sa sinabi mo? Matagal na pong expired ang Bayanihan 1. Paano natin gamitin yan to run after violators? So yung ganon, dahil may layer ngayon, may delay, ang hirap talaga. Pero dati, nung pre-pandemic, yun nga, depende rin sa pagtingin siguro ng presidente sa media. So si GMA noon parang hindi siya very approachable. Mahirap siyang subject. Kung magtanong ka sa kanya minsan one word answer rin lang. Alam mo yung para siyang teacher na wag kang magtatanong ng hindi mo tiyak o hindi ka sigurado sa itatanong mo. 'Di ba? She's not there to educate you. She will just answer your question. Parang ganon. Si Pinoy naman noon, mahaba siya sumagot. As in, maano siya talaga, minsan kami yung sumusuko. Kami yung tipong, alam mo yung parang, sir, okay na, nakuha na naman yung sagot. Pwede na tayong hinto. Pero marami siyang kwento. And siguro reflection din yun kung gaano siya ka-transparent. Kasi hindi siya takot magkwento eh. Hindi siya naiwas sa sagot. Or minsan halata mo rin naman kung masama yung, kung ayaw nilang tanong mo, kung galit sila or naiinis sila or napipikon sila, di ba? Kahit pag-aano sila na-prepare for that. But there are also light moments like, yun nga, after a coverage sa probinsya or coverage abroad, there will always be those mini press cons with the president na medyo mas relax na, mas kalmado sila, mas makita mo yung pagiging tao nila. Si Ali nga, binuking pa ako na nakikita niya ako I don't do that anymore. Nagpayosi-yosi sa gilid, 'di ba? So minsan kasama ko siya nagyosi din siya. So yung ganon, or si GMA kung minsan makikikain with you after an event kasi gusto niya yung nakalatag sa inyo. So yun. Ewan ko lang for the MPC under Duterte because a year before the Aquino administration ended, then I joined the desk. So hindi ko na inabutan actually yung pag-transition from Aquino to Duterte sa press corps. Camille would have witnessed that.
But that's a good point yung ano nga, ibang-iba yung dynamics, especially ngayon because of Zoom. Kasi literally, you can be muted um, by the spokesman or the people who are running the Zoom call. Literally, pwede kang i-mute at hindi ka na makakatanong ng question mo. In fact, I think that has actually happened. Minute or keso pangit yung internet or something like that. Anyway, so Alfonso naman, like, how do you see the interaction between the president, the office of the president? I always have to mention them both, kasi parang in a way they're like they function within one environment, but they can be considered separate entities also, or separate things. With civic society and the youth, kasi ikaw yung representative ng buong youth, the joke lang. Yeah, with how that interacts, like maybe consider like talking about this specific president also, or even the last president.
Medyo mahirap kasi feeling ko hindi naman madalas directly addressed ang kabataan by the office of the president or by the president himself, or whoever the sitting president is. And so I feel like it's a little hard for me to be able to nitpick on on how it really goes about. But I will say, siguro in general na lang, bilang medyo intersectional naman ng kabataan, bilang pag sinasabi natin kabataan, pwedeng nagmumula sa sektor ng kababaihan, ng LGBT, ng manggagawa even, ng mga estudyante, syempre. Kaya feeling ko this particular administration, I don't particularly enjoy, or I don't particularly appreciate siguro how this administration addresses audiences in general, civic societies in general, mainly because there's a lot of gaslighting that tends to happen. Like only very recently, spokesperson Harry Roque was questioned, for example, about Olympic champion Diaz, diba? About whether the Malacañang should apologize for including her in the drug matrix, in the ouster matrix, and things like that. And so I read in some of the news articles quotes from spokesperson Harry Roque talking about how none of these things happened, or something to that effect. And I feel like, this happened literally 2 years ago. I mean, and if they could gaslight us and lie to us about something that happened so recently and something that's already so well documented, what else have they been lying about? Parang medyo may ganun. So there's just this honesty in that, I suppose, in that relationship between civic societies and the office of the president. I feel like there's just a lot of distrust, and even when they are indeed being honest, I suppose in some instances, it's difficult to be able to sort of respect and trust them, considering the track record of all the deceit, all the not just even dishonesty in general, but intellectual dishonesty itself. Yung parang sobrang manipulative, insidious way of pag-oversimplify ng mga bagay or pag-overcomplicate ng mga bagay in order to avert accountability, things like that. And so, yun, parang there's dishonesty, there's distrust.
Yeah, trust, big word. Sorry, I had to say that. Ali, curious ako. Kasi, yun nga, na-witness mo. Kasi may moments din naman kahit si Pinoy dati, di ba, na napipiko na rin siya sa media and he expresses it actually, di ba? Kung napipiko na siya or may ayaw siya or whatever. Of course, it was in a very friendly and hindi threat to the life of said media. But how ano yung dynamics din nun? Yung parang yun nga, interacting with these sectors that are oftentimes very critical, sometimes adversarial towards the office of the president or the president himself.
Kung isipin yung bata pa namin, parang affected talaga nung 23 years old. Parang affected ako nung una eh. Parang kasi nakikita namin yung mga nangyayari, tapos ba't ito yung nakikita nyo? Diba? Pero, siguro babalik dito kung gaano kalakas yung influence nung presidente at ng mga bosses namin sa aming mga staff. Kasi sila mismo yun nga, tinatanggap nila kung ano man yung criticism at sinasagot. At hindi kami parang trained para awayin or i-block off or parang wag silang kausapin or i-treat as kaaway ang media. No, so ang laking influence sa amin noon na nakikita namin na tingin namin malinaw sa kanila kung anong trabaho ng media, no? At may trabaho sila, may trabaho kami, at sa gitna ng trabaho na yon ay may respeto kahit papaano dun sa kanya-kanyang trabaho. At yun siguro yung pag-intindi ng halaga nung trabaho ng media, kaya hindi rin kami nagkaroon ng ng apprehension or hatred towards them. And sa totoo lang, pagka nandun ka sa venue or sa site, marirealize mo pare-parehas lang din naman kayong nagtatrabaho. Di ba? Pare-parehas lang din naman kayong gustong gawin kung ano yung dapat gawin. So, yun, meron pa.
Pagod.
Yes, nakikitang-kita mo na naghahabol, nag-aabang, anong susunod na mangyayari. Ganon din kami. No, so ganun at ganon din sila. So, meron pa nga ako naaalala isang incident na nung bagong-bago pa lang ako, nagre-record ako sa isang ambush interview. Tapos nauna siguro akong mag-record kaysa dun sa iba na humabol lang ng mga media. Tapos naalala ko, si JV Arsena ng TV5. Si JV, bagong-bago lang din siya. Tapos, tinanong niya ako kung pwedeng mahingi yung audio nung recording. So, nung una, totoo lang, di ko alam anong gagawin ko. Dapat ko bang ginagawa yun? Di ba, parang, baka ewan ko, dapat mauna kami or something. Pero siguro dahil nga, wala namang ganoong directive sa amin yung mga boss na huwag niyong pansinin ng media, etc. Inabot ko, binigay ko, sinabi ko pa sa opisina. So, ewan ko, reflection siguro yun nung naging relationship at least nung kaming mga staff noon sa media na may respeto tingin ko sa kanya-kanyang trabaho.
Yun nga talaga, no? Nagto-trickle down talaga kung anong sinasabi ng principal nung nasa itaas. Like it affects how you see things or how the people, from cabinet secretaries, undersecretaries, ASECs down to yung speechwriter na naging tig-record ng ambush interview. But it also affects how you, react to these groups that, sometimes can be very, sabihin ko sana aggressive, hindi. Adversarial towards the president. I've been consuming a lot of your time, so we're down to our last question. So yun nga, parang I hope all our discussions have given our viewers, a better perspective of how the office of the president and how the president works, diba? Parang ang daming nangyayari, ang daming things that you have to think about, ang daming attached agencies, things that you have to consider, the people around him. So given all that we've discussed today, the expectations, the reality of the presidency, and given, although we didn't really discuss this today, the problems or the issues that the Duterte administration inevitably will be leaving behind, yung pandemic response nga, the economic situation in the Philippines, like what things should voters look out for and note when picking a president in 2022? Siguro Joyce, if you want to go first.
Siguro ang analogy ko dyan ay parang paghahanap ng boyfriend. Kung maghanap ka nga ng partner mo in life, ang dami mong chinichikan na mental boxes, 'di ba? Dapat ganito, dapat ganyan. Mapanuri ka. So dapat ganoon ka din siguro kung mamili ka ng politiko, hindi lang ng presidente. I know that the tone of our discussion is on the president. But I just want to point out, baka paalala lang kung magboto ka ng presidente, yung actions niya in general will affect you. Pero kung magboto ka ng barangay captain, direct ang epekto sa iyo noon dahil doon ka kukuha ng lahat ng businesses, magkaroon ng baha sa inyo, etc. And sometimes you overlook, you tend to downplay na importante rin na inaalam mo kung sino bang binoboto mong barangay captain dyan. So all the politico that you vote have an impact on you. So dapat mapanuri ka. Siguro yun yung gusto kong gamitin na word, mapanuri. Ayokong sabihin na matalino kasi hindi mo naman masabi na bobo ang botante kahit sino pa ang binoto niyan. Kung hindi ka mag-agree sa boto niya, respetuhin mo na lang. Kasi hindi mo alam kung paano nakaapekto sa kanya yun eh. Yung taong binoboto niya. So hindi natin pwedeng ma-generalize na if you vote for this, bobo ka. If you vote for this one, matalino ka. So kung ano't ano man, maging mapanuri ka na lang sana sa pagboto mo. At sana ay informed ang iyong gagawing pagboto. So kung ano sa tingin mo yung yung mga importante para sa iyo, yung 'di ba yung hindi lang yung dahil bukas pwede ka niyang bigyan ng 3,000 para sa boto mo. Paano yung 1 week after, down the line, 6 years down the line, paano naman yon? So, di ba, tingnan mo rin kung siya ba ay competent, siya ba ay may platapormang tama, kakayanin ba niya yung rigors of the job, the mental stress of the position. Kasi pag tiningnan mo sa Constitution, napaka-basic ng requirements para sa isang tatakbo. Kaya nasa sa atin na yun kung paano natin punuan yun. Diba na, bagamat ito lang ang requirement dun sa Constitution, siguro naman higit tayong dapat mapanuri kung mamili tayo ng politiko natin. Kaya sa kung maghanap ka ng partner mo na 6 weeks later maghiwalay din kayo. Hindi ako bitter. I'm just trying to make it light.
Pero ang ganda nun kasi parang at the end of the day nga, I think kahit anong research gawin mo, parang sugal pa rin kung sinong pipiliin mo kasi hindi mo pa rin alam at the end of the day, diba? At the end of the day, diba, kung paano talaga siya magfa-function once nasa position na siya, whether pangulo yan, mayor, barangay captain, tanod, whatever. Pero siguro nga, minimize yung chance na magsisisi ka siguro down the line na ito yung pinili mo kasi nga isang boto, you are one
Tama
vote.
kaya, isa siyang sugal.
Yeah.
Sugal siya in the sense na hindi mo alam how he or she will perform. Pero kung may track record na yan, abay may pwede tayong batayan. May pwede din tayong tingnan na, palpak na pala siya dati bakit pa natin iboto ulit? So may ganun din naman.
Okay, Alfonso?
Sorry, nag-brown out sa akin nung nagtanong.
Kaya pala, sabi ko bakit ka naging itim na aparisyon kanina? Okay. Kinabahan ako doon. Sabi ko, ano nangyayari? Okay.
Yung tanong.
Anyway, sorry. Given our discussions today, yung parang yun nga, yung things you have to consider, the people surrounding the president, yung capability niya to handle the physical, including the physical, the mental, the emotional stress of the office. Like what things should voters look out for and note when choosing a president in 2022. Given again na hindi naman talaga tayo sure kung ito talaga yung perfect na president, if there's even such a thing as a perfect president.
Yeah. Siguro to echo na lang what Ms. Joy said about the quality that voters must embody more than the kind of leader that they should look for. Yun na maging mapanuri nga, maging critical, it's not just a matter of analyzing people better from like a psychosocial perspective, kumbaga, or whatever. Pero yung pagiging mapanuri na that goes beyond the personality, that goes beyond the identity. Like for example, when they make grand proclamations like they're going to fight off the Chinese war vessels by riding a jet ski out into the ocean. Is this feasible or is this just gravitas? Is this just bravado? Things like that, because we do tend to be so easily persuaded by pronouncements that are grand, that are very that they're very enticing, that sound
sexy.
That sounds sexy, right? I do not want to use that adjective to describe certain people that are certain subjects that are being discussed. But yeah, and so to go beyond these things, to go beyond the facade of what politicking is. We enjoy the drama of mudslinging. We like for example, in the case of 2016 elections, we nitpicked on the citizenship of Grace Poe, and then we talked about who her potential parents are, things like that. We're dealing with 6 years of what the Philippines will be, especially now with with a global health crisis upon us. If we had foreseen it back then, would we still have talked about things as silly as who the father is or the mother is of this political aspirant? Also, I think we need to also try to imagine better alternatives or alternatives to asserting our democratic rights um, outside traditional concepts of referendum. Um, Yun na nga parang uh, yung sinasabi nila na parang your vote only counts for one, 'di ba? Each person, parang yeah, but that's not, the value of how do you maximize the value of that one vote when you could also, other than simply voting, you could also, take part in the larger political life. Makilahok, makibaka, makipag-usap, makipag-engage ng mga tao outside your middle class bubble, outside your echo chambers, things like that, di ba? So parang how do you maximize the value of that one vote other than simply being a critical voter, other than simply being a voter that likes to examine and analyze and interrogate and really try to understand, every flaw and deficiency that emerges out of every political aspirant. But also it's a matter of how you interact and engage with other voters, with people who also have the capacity to turn the tides against, certain fascist individuals. No names, just fascist individuals. That's all.
Singit ko lang na may question dito, but I think this is appropriate for another discussion on voters and how voters speak. So we'll take this question, we'll note this question for next discussion. So Ali, based ka sa mga pinag-usapan natin and your own experiences, di ba, of ano yung pressures at ano yung challenges kung nasa Malacañang ka, ikaw yung may hawak ikaw yung nakaupo sa Office of the President. Anong kailangan i-note ng mga voters? Not just the first time voters, kahit yung mga, di ba, yung mga veteranong voters who might need to refresh their memories and decision-making skills.
So ko sinabi ni Miss Joyce na parang maging proud ka bang ipakilala sa nanay mo at pipiliin mo, no? Parang kailangan maging critical, kailangan maging mapanuri kasi kaya ako pino-point out yung kung gaano ka influential itong pipiliin nating pinuno, no? Kasi magti-trickle down siya to sa ating lahat no. Kaya kung yung mismong pinuno natin ay tagilid yung values and principles, talagang pati tayo apektado diyan, no? So sa akin ididiin ko talaga yung aligned dapat siya sa values and principles na mahalaga sa iyo at sa mga tao, no? Someone that we could look up to, someone na kayang mag-attract ng mga Pilipino, no, especially the youth, to work for and with the government, no, na kayang i-empower us to work and contribute to nation building. No, kasi klaro na hindi iisang tao lang yung dapat na mag-resolve nitong mga problema natin And masyadong maraming kailangan gawin at kailangan ng tulong ng lahat. No, so again, yung isa pa noon yung siguro ididiin ko yung bukod sa pagkakaroon ng malasakit sa tao ay may tiwala siya sa mga Pilipino. Kasi kung feeling niya siya lang yung magaling at wala siyang pake sa mga tao at tingin niya walang mako-contribute yung iba, paano natin ma-resolve yung mga problema natin? No? So isipin niyo na lang kung may leader tayo na masipag, mahusay, tapat na ginagawa yung trabaho niya, diba? He will take the lead and magkakaroon siya ng mga taong ganun din, magiging masipag, sisikaping maging mahusay at tapat din sa trabaho. And ang saklap lang nun kung kabaliktaran yung mangyari, no? Kasi ganung klaseng government workforce at ganung population din yung ganung klaseng population din mangyayari sa atin, no? Kung gumagawa ng kalokohan sa taas, paano pa kaya yung sa baba, no? Pero kung maayos yung nasa taas, kahit paano mahihiya yung mga nasa baba, no? So yun, ang maganda naman, ang tanong nasan yung Pangulo, pero 'di ba, parang nasa sa atin pa rin talaga. At ang maganda doon nasa kamay natin kung sino yun. kung sino yung pangulo na yun. So, tayong pipili, tayong boboto, tayong hahalal sa kanila. So, as much as sinasabi natin na powerful yung pangulo, influential siya, yun yung pinakamaganda sa lahat. Nasa sa atin kung sino yung gusto nating piliin. Kaya, ganun kahalaga talaga yung participation natin. Kaya kailangan nating gawin yung parte natin na mag-register at bumoto. At saka dadagdag ko lang na kailangan na ng tulong ng mga tao na ikampanya kung sino yung mga leaders na gusto natin. Hindi na pa pwede yung manunood lang tayo at magsasabi lang tayo ng opinion natin online. Kailangan kung sino yung tingin nating leader na yon, ikalat natin sa lahat para yun ang manalo at hindi na mangyari yung mga nangyayari ngayon siguro. Yun.
Ganun, maghanap ng jowa. Yun yung takeaway ko. Yun pa rin yung takeaway ko na maghanap ng jowa. Thank you so much to the three of you and Camille who had to, na nauna na sa, parang namatay. Hindi namatay si Camille. Umalis lang siya ng Zoom call. Na nauna na sa atin. Thank you so much, Joyce, Alfonso, and Ali. Thank you for joining this discussion. I hope those who are watching it on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, I think we're also streaming on Twitter, who are watching it here sa webinar, I hope you learned a thing or two or at the very least, it sparked a discussion in your, wag naman in discussion in your head. Ano yun, nagdedebate ka sa sarili mo. I hope this sparks discussion din with your friends, with your communities, diba? To help you decide come 2022. Tulad nga ng sabi ni Ali, diba? Parang we talk so much about the president, the office of the president, at the end of the day, sino bang pumipili kung sino may hawak ng kapangyarihan na yun? Tayo naman yun. So never minimize your power. Okay, if they want to continue the discussion or baka gusto lang kayo i-follow on social media, as friendly ha, hindi nung i-follow kayo social media para i-troll. How can they find you? What accounts can they follow? Pwede rin kayo mag-plug ng website for Miss Joyce. Kasi friendly naman tayo, hindi kami makasarili sa Rappler na Rappler lang yung pinapromote natin. Because guys, you also need to consume like a variety of media din in the Philippines, internationally. So social media handles or accounts or websites that they can check for your work and for more discussions on the 2022 elections. Miss Joyce siguro at first.
Teka, paano ba? So sa website, manilastandard.net. Sa personal ko naman ay so I have a Facebook account which is Joyce Panares, which is just my name. Yung IG ko lang yung medyo kakaiba. It's the Joyce of Eating because I write a food column on the side. Obvious ba? Body of evidence. Diba? So that's where you can reach me.
Ang ganda, di ba? Political reporter, desk editor, food critic din.
Kasalanan niya nang namayapang si Isa Red because he was our lifestyle editor and then he said, "Oy, Joyce, pagod na ako magbasa ng food column na sinulat ng payat. So, halika na, magsulat ka na." No, kaya nabuo yung IG na yon.
Ang ganda nun. Alfonso, if they want to follow you on social media, what accounts should they check out?
I don't think you should. Don't follow me on social media.
Huwag na lang.
I'm kidding. If you want to follow me, it's just not _Alfonso. And the reason why it's not Alfonso is that so if anybody ever sues me for anything I say online, I can simply say, that wasn't me, that was not Alfonso. That's all.
Para ba yun hindi masyadong magalit yung mga magulang mo? Shoutout kay tito at tita kung nanonood. Sana wag kayong nanonood na siguro kakapan si Alfonso if they watch this discussion. Ali?
Hindi ko rin alam kung bakit nyo ako i-follow pero follow nyo si Alfonso at si Miss Joyce. Finalo ko na sila. Marami kayong makapupulot sa kanila. Pero ako masyado nang malayo yung buhay ko from speech writing. No, medyo kalokohan na yung ginagawa ko ngayon. Pero tingin ko mahalaga rin yun para to keep us sane sa lahat na nangyayari ngayon. So kung gusto niyo rin ngayon matuwa, pwede niyo i-follow na lang yung linya-linya at saka yung linya-linya.ph. No, pero tinatry rin namin gawin yung part namin as a brand at alam namin na maraming kailangan pagtulungan at hindi lang sa pagpapasaya ng mga tao pero sa pag-spark lang ng ng mga pag-uusap at mamulat tayo sa mga pinakamahalagang bagay sa mundo. So, yun.
I-plug mo na rin yung podcast mo, ba't nahihiya ka pa?
Tama nyo na lang din yung The Linya Linya Show podcast. Sana makausap ko si Alfonso doon, tsaka si Miss Joyce, tsaka si Bea soon. So doon naman kahit paano may mga matututuhan kayo. So follow nyo na lang din sa Spotify.
Yung ganda. And then if you want more insights specific to the Aquino administration, I think you have an episode with the members of the speechwriters group during the Aquino administration. Kung gusto niyo mas insight din kung paano gumagalaw, kung paano yung buhay nila years back under the late President Aquino, you might want to listen to that. Thank you again for joining me in this discussion. Salamat din sa mga nanood. Thank you for those who sent their comments. I wasn't able to read all of them, but we are taking note of your comments and your questions for future episodes as well. So today is July 28, mali pa yung date ko. Today is July 28, palapit na ng palapit ang May 9, 2022. The deadline to register to vote for the first time, update your records, or to reactivate your voting record is on September 30. So huwag tayo mag-cram kasi kung sa September 29 at September 30 tayo mag-register, napakahaba po ng pila mga kaibigan. So let's avoid that. So as soon as you can, and if it's safe for you guys, register to vote na. Some reminders from your friends here at Rappler, Move PH, Rappler Civic Engagement Arm wants you to participate in the elections beyond voting, and here's how. You can help fact-check claims on social media during the elections and help debunk misleading information before they can help shape public conversation, cover the elections by highlighting issues in your community, and get training to be a citizen journalist who will be reporting election-related issues and initiatives in your communities. Finally, you can lead a movement in your community and help ramp up voter registration before September 30, as well as help increase voter turnout in May 2022. You can visit the URL that is being flashed on screen. Correct. Naka-flash na siya on screen. It's rplr.co/phvotechallenge. Again, rplr.co/phvotechallenge. This year's election is crucial to the future of the Philippines. Rappler is currently gearing up to have coverage in key areas around the country. You can help us reach this goal by joining Rappler Plus. Visit rappler.com/plus. If a flash ba siya on screen? Hindi. So visit rappler.com/plus. End of endorsements and reminders from Rappler. We're still in the middle of a pandemic and we know it is scary to go out, but please, if you're able, and as long as you have an abundance of caution with you, register to vote. And while you're at it, if you're qualified and able, magpabakuna na kayo against COVID-19. Check with your your LGUs on how to do that. Tandaan natin, ikaw, dear voter, ang main character in the 2022 elections. This is our decision to make. Atin ang Pilipinas. You have been watching PH Vote Dialogues. This has been Bea Copin. Thank you so much for joining us, and good night, everybody. Goodbye. Bye-bye.